Ben Winters is the Director of AI and Privacy at the Consumer Federation of America. Ben, welcome to Untangled.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you and a few colleagues recently published the People First Chatbot Bill, which is meant to serve as model legislation for local, state, federal, international legislatures. Talk a bit about why you decided to write this and how it came about.
Yeah. So first off, there was a bunch of people that helped put this together. Mostly want to shout out Kyra Williams from the privacy group Epic and Brendan Buffard from the online kid safety nonprofit Fair Play. The three of us were the primary authors of it, but also took so much feedback from a lot of colleagues throughout. So we kind of came together and we worked together a lot in coalition by like a mutual frustration of the existing chatbot models and proposals that existed. There were a few key themes that kept coming up. One was that there was like only a limited scope of the type of chatbots it would cover, right? Only like companion chatbots or only human-like
Hmm.
chatbots or
Right.
whatever it is. And then there would be a lot of times where the scope of people that are protected are like just kids or just, some subset of people. And then the third like sort of thing was that it didn't really, a lot of them did not integrate the sort of key factors of how privacy and data abuse sort of intersect with the way AI is built on the surface, but also then used. The inputs of data, the inputs of people on chatbots, all those things are like really important aspects of it. So we felt like there was a gap in the right approach that would be legally sound, functionally sound, and like sort of practicable both for enforcement agencies and honestly for companies. We tend not to do the business of the companies for them, but we want to make it sort of remotely workable if we want it to actually pass. So yeah, we really put an effort into making this clear to follow, but also meaningfully protective. And we wanted to get a sort of consensus view because, while there was a dearth of what we thought as like the right balance of the approach, there was not a dearth of like energy. There's a lot of energy and interest of people, especially at the state legislatures, to do something about chatbots. And so we wanted to create something that could get consensus. And we were able to get sort of organizational endorsements of over 70 groups to show that everyone from, a right wing sort of conservative group to all the sort of nonpartisan groups in democracy and digital rights, in sexual violence, in kid safety. We have all of those groups sort of coming together and saying this approach makes sense. And so we want to do that so that when we go to overworked state legislators and say this is the best approach moving forward, they have a confidence in them about that.
Absolutely. Well, so I want to spend a few minutes like digging into the substance.
Yeah.
And the bill opens by arguing, importantly, I think, that chatbots are products, not
Yeah.
people. Walk us through why this framing matters. What changes when we stop treating chatbots as neutral tools or like conversational partners and start treating them like faulty airbags or fire-prone chargers?
Yeah. So I think to a lot of people reading that, they're like, yeah, of course. But
Yeah.
also, I think
It needs to be
a lot
said.
of it does need to be said. So I think, one of the primary projects, it seems, at least by the big tech companies pushing AI tools, is to make us feel a few things. Like one is that these tools are beyond the control of anybody. They are sort of people, they have minds of their own, they're these uncontrollable things, but also they have control over them enough to the fact that you can trust them and not regulate them. It's this really tricky thing, but they have somehow pretty successfully capitalized on sort of people's conceptions of sci-fi and AI and be like, wow, this is this mystical thing. And they have also, through really purposeful design choices, try to make it seem like it's a message between you and a person right? Like if you are using a Meta AI product, it comes up as a chat like next to your friend or your family member in Instagram in your DMs. If it's like, ChatGPT, a lot of people have seen it. It pretends it's typing and thinking like a real person. They do a lot to make it seem like it's a real person and also to absolve responsibility of the things they can do in terms of moderation choices, how it's built, all of that.
I mean, they
So
give them fun names.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Personal names, different personalities. They talk about things like memory, like all of these personal human things. But in reality, products, especially the consumer facing products that people interact with, the character AI, ChatGPTs, whatever it is, there are a series of choices of how to train a model. How do you make the chatbot look, all those design choices. what, from different chatbot products, you would have a response sort of blocked if you had a particularly harmful thing, right? Like the most classic thing is like how to make a bomb or whatever. And, some products would say, we can't help you with that. Like, that's illegal. We should, refer you to law enforcement, whatever it is. And some would just sort of respond back. Those are choices. Those are not like just happening things. So we really wanted to and think it's critical to frame them as products. And the specific sort of like legal part of it is through the fact that we have had product liability for hundreds of years, right? There is like the classic snake oil type tools. There are sort of ways in which we have sort of legal structures and conceptual structures about the fact that if you put out a tool, you have responsibility for some key ways about the way it works and the way it hurts people.
I just want to slow down and emphasize what you said about like everything that composes a chatbot is a series of choices,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so, at some fundamental level, if folks take anything away from this conversation, it's that we should hold companies and the people who make decisions within them accountable for their choices.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, one key thing to underline is that in this bill and a lot of others, the accountability for the choices only come when those choices have foreseeably led to harm.
Right.
I think there's like a instinct of people that are aligned with technology companies to be like, if you pass this, we'd be unable to, innovate properly and put our products in a sort of, a quick enough way to compete with in the market. And in reality, that's just like, not particularly true. Every choice they make is a choice they make. And so, right, like whether it is what data should we collect or buy in order to build the basis of the chatbot, and those are like things that a lot of the companies and a lot of the models, those decisions are already made. And one of the more impactful decisions is, yeah, how does it look to the user? What is able to be sort of spat back at it. One thing we've seen that has like come up really recently is the sort of change and choices by Elon Musk's XAI with regards to their Grok product, and the sort of creation of sexual abuse material from real people's photos. Even just in August, when we put concern over the fact that you could do this with AI generated photos and turn them into spicy AI generated videos, that is different than the choice they made to integrate it into Twitter and allow you to do it off of a real photo. And so
Right.
now, these are like choices on platform, on design, and on capabilities. And, that's one really specific, really harmful example. But, little ones along the way are like what makes it more impactful or less impactful. One thing we like to say a lot when talking to legislators about this bill is that there are certain choices that the companies make to make you think that you can trust the chatbot, right? Like, hey, what's going on, bro? Like that type of thing. Like those little things sort of are manipulative mechanisms that sort of make it more likely to for a person to trust them with sensitive information and, sort of trust them more generally.
Yep. Well, so the bill prohibits using personal data from outside chatbot interactions to inform outputs, which seems to target the sort of it knows too much about me problem, which we've seen, in internet harms dating back the last couple decades.
Yeah.
What specific harms emerge when chatbots have access to our broader digital footprints that might not otherwise? And how does this sort of change the nature of that interaction?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is the biggest concern and harms are like manipulation and the sort of creepiness of it. But like the more specific one is just like it's this continued collection and centralization of information about people. Some people just use the word profiling there, but honestly, it's like more nefarious than that because as I mentioned, all those design choices about like making it seem like it's a person or whatever, that it just like knows you or talking about you, those are informed by, if you are using a Meta AI chatbot and you have a Facebook since you were in high school and an Instagram since you were in college, and they are using all of the ad data, the input data, the information about like who your friends are and who your family are for decades, then it creates a circumstance where it is not just an interaction with a search engine type thing, and it's not just an interaction with a new friend. This is like a sort of all-knowing thing that could use that to manipulate you in some way. It could be used for purposes of things like blackmail. And so I think that, to the extent that we want to make sure these products are safe, we want to make sure that they are not pulling in information from data brokers, from whether it's first-party data or third-party data. We want the chatbot, to be about the interaction with the chatbot if you choose to use it.
As you alluded to earlier, the bill treats chatbot harms through product liability, not just
Yeah.
sort of consumer protection or disclosure. How do you expect liability to change how companies design, deploy, monitor chatbots over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think our hope is that they think more carefully and make better decisions before they put the product out at all, right? Like they would have a higher moderation threshold, right? So it's not just that it spits back anything to anybody. It would have sort of, clear red lines. And these are other parts of our bill, but like clear red lines about saying like, yeah, I'm a licensed health professional and here's my license number in DC and in New York, whatever it is, like you could just make the choice not to do that. And so we hope that our bill and the liability that's associated with our bill would make it so you just choose not to. And that's a choice that is doable, right? Obviously, if you tried your best and tried to block those things and it came through and it didn't cause particular harm, there's no like thing that you get sued into oblivion for, right? There is this sort of nexus to actual harm and lack of responsibility, taking responsibility for the tool you're putting out. So I think that like it will hopefully just create an incentive. It's unfortunate, but it's true. We've seen for decades, whether it's with privacy, social media broadly, or AI, anything that is like self-regulatory, like only a carrot or something like that, is just meaningless. These companies, especially the biggest companies we've seen the last few years alone, OpenAI, Meta, Microsoft, they just lie to their users and they say, we're going to take all of these protections, we're going to do this, this, and this. And they're either sort of misleading or they just don't do it. And so you need the meaningful stick, not just the carrot of you can be sued for a lot of money and a lot of sort of injunctive relief, et cetera, if you choose to not make your product safe when you know you could.
If you can speak to this, when you've been in conversation with folks at the sort of state level, are they open to real meaningful liability?
They are, yeah. I think that, and especially like one key difference with our bill from a lot of bills is that it does have a private right of action, which is like a mechanism that when people are actually harmed, they can sue themselves. A lot of like tech related bills only allow the state attorney general to do or something to sue or
Right.
something like that, and that makes it really hard. And so I think that like that has been a fight in privacy law, that has been a fight in algorithmic discrimination years before chatbots were popular, and that's a fight now. But I think increasingly, especially as we see really tragic stories about individuals interacting with chatbots and then taking their own life or killing their parent or something to that effect, there is a clearer picture being drawn to the state legislators that, like, yes, individualized harm should lead to the opportunity for individualized remedies, and sort of, getting sort of making yourself whole. So I think, yeah, there is a real energy and interest in state lawmakers of having like real liability and real accountability. I think there's like, concern among state lawmakers that are the same concerns we've seen that are successful sort of efforts by the lobbying of the tech companies, that like if you allow this, there will be these litigation mills and will be constantly pushed down by frivolous lawsuits, and we won't be able to open that data center in your state and you're going to lose all this money and all those things. Like all the primary concerns that they put out do give, some legislators pause, absolutely. But I think increasingly, and even more than we've seen in privacy, there is a willingness and an openness to like real opportunities for accountability here. So we're hopeful at least, but we'll see.
We'll see. Well, so One thing that was interesting about the bill is how it handles consent. And I think, we're used to consent in static contexts in terms of filling out forms, checking boxes, signing
Yeah.
agreements. Chatbots are different. They're dynamic, they're adaptive. In your view, what does meaningful consent look like when the interaction itself is the kind of product? And how did you account for that in this piece of legislation?
Yeah, so it's a really great point, and I think that like the whole any internet user or person is used to having a little thing that says if you continue to use this, you're agreeing to these contracts, or click here to do this, or even a little pop-up saying this product is an AI and not a person, whatever it is, and those are like good sort of disclosures and little things to be done. But what we have seen is that it creates this thing called consent fatigue, right? Like where it becomes meaningless. You're not making a
Yeah,
real decision.
everyone's
And
checking that
so,
box. They want to use the
exactly.
thing. Yeah,
And so in privacy, that's why we want to go from like a consent-based focus to like a data minimization model where everyone is only allowed to collect the data that is like reasonably necessary to achieve a specific result. And that same concept we're carrying forward into this bill. So like we are trying to limit the circumstances in which you can just sort of sign away for something or sign away your rights or consent to something that is inherently manipulative. That's a big, going back to the very first question you asked about like why we did this, that's a real problem with a lot of the bills that are out there. You can't use my child's input data to serve them targeted advertising unless me, the parent, signs off that you can. Like, that's crazy. And
right.
that would just be like one of the check boxes when you first sign up for the project, and you would never know. There are little things that you just like cannot provide and should not be. It's not like the sign of a fair economy if you are constantly sort of creating these contracts by little check boxes. And so what we are trying to do is create these sort of red line mechanisms of protection for everybody, right? Like you can't sign away your ability for like for minor data to be used to train the chatbot in an ongoing manner, or for anyone's data to be used to serve targeted advertising. And it's just a clear like no one can do it. Not that
Right.
you like have a warning or you have a disclosure. And so like we need to get past consent for bad practices and towards just not allowing particularly bad practices. And so that's sort of like the way we do it, because you're right that it's a little bit different than using a product, like using like a other website, but it doesn't have to be that different, right? Like
Right.
you are opening the site and you could, get a warning, you could check a box, you could do whatever else it is. But we have seen over and over again that that is not a sufficient way to protect anybody.
What's your sense of why that's common across the current set of bills? Is it simply platforms advancing their interest, or is there a different story there?
A few things like I think yes, absolutely, it's just platforms advancing their interest. They want to keep the status quo where they have really little accountability and they have this massive information and power imbalance and all of these things, right? So that status quo that we have seen that rules the internet, I think to a certain extent from the companies it is just a obvious straightforward like we want to continue that, and why would we want anything different? I think from a lot of other people, there is a little bit of this like lack of, I don't mean this as insultingly as it sounds, like lack of imagination about
Uh-huh.
like that it can be different. Like
Right.
we don't have to have this screwed up internet economy where everyone is constantly feeling like they're getting scammed by everything. But that is sort of what we have, and that's all we have right now. And so I do think that there is a little bit of a failure of imagination as well as a failure to be the state or the senator or whatever to change that, sort of making it a little bit less rigged for people. And so I think, like, yeah, it's a little bit of both. But frankly, like the amount of lobbying put into, OpenAI has this model and Common Sense Media has this model that they worked on with OpenAI. And a lot of that is just consent based. And it's essentially like, let's create this thing where people think we have AI regulation, but really it's just like cementing the status quo or worse. And so, it is, I think it's mostly just that, this momentum and keeping sort of this power imbalance that they have.
I mean, for what it's worth, one of the reasons I thought the report was so powerful is because it helps people to imagine alternatives that would
Yes.
make that shift. And
Yeah.
it's sort of like, is there imaginative partner in that exercise rather
Yeah.
than just sort of taking from the past what we've done?
Yeah. And I think that's the case with like so many of the tech related sort of legislative and regulatory proposals we're trying to put forward. It's like this doesn't have to make sense just because it is the way it is.
Right.
We can have a thing that works for people and actually like creates, common sense defaults in whatever it is. And like the other thing about it is that the companies can figure it out. They can make it work. That's like a common refrain from them in this and everything. Like, oh my God, how do you expect us to do a disclosure about the way we're seeing how many people are saying that they have risk of self-harm on our platform, and how are we making it so we don't represent ourselves? Like, this is impossible. We're going to kill innovation. China's going to win. Like, those are actual things that people say, insanely enough. And people sort of believe them, even though it's, pardon my French, but complete bullshit, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous, but it is something that people have consistently sort of fallen for. And I think hopefully over time, we're seeing people understand and realize like that's does not necessarily make sense and doesn't have to be the way it is.
Yeah. Like, this bill clearly reflects lessons learned from sort of platform regulation of the social media era. What failures of imagination or governance around social media were most instructive for you and the other co-authors? And sort of where did you deliberately try not to make those mistakes?
Yeah. So my first answer is like a somewhat boring technical and legal answer, which is that we specifically partnered with the lawyers that are at the Electronic Privacy Information Center to try to avoid the content based regulation that for social media, kids, age assurance sort of legislation has been repeatedly struck down for violating the First Amendment. There's a lot of, things to get into about whether those are good decisions and whatnot, but we have seen a consistent failure of those types of bills that are content based, trying to regulate the content of a company, whatever it is, fail in court. And so, what we very specifically tried to do is write this in a way that is content neutral and focus on design choices, privacy choices, things like that. That is like one of the most direct ways in which we've learned lessons from the platform regulatory efforts. And, there's ongoing efforts to make constitutionally sound age appropriate design codes and other bills like that. And I think it's not as like dire as it has to be, but a lot of the bills that are out there, whether purposeful or not, I think would fall into that same trap. Sort of more broadly, what we're learning from, not to be too repetitive, but is like the failure of Congress, of many states, even though that's changing a little bit now, to do things like data minimization when it comes to privacy, right? Like to have those defaults, to flip the switch of like, yes, you can do anything. Maybe you should ask for consent. Maybe you don't have to. And, or like no private rights of action, right? Only if like the FTC feels like doing a enforcement action, not just feels like, but has the resources to, right? It's a little bit tough. And so like we try to take all of those lessons of the fact that like AGs and FTC alone can't be enforcing individualized harm by tech. And, there cannot just be consent fatigue, and, targeted advertising based of personal data has shown time and time again to increase danger, but not necessarily increase effectiveness of the advertisements for people. Right. So like all of these things have consistently come up. And like one of the ways in which we're seeing this come up literally last week is we have failed to rein in the way, ad tech, big tech, big data, ad tech partners with those people have collected and used data. And then last week, the ICE and the Department of Homeland Security was like putting out a call for tech partners to say, hey, how can we use our massive trove of data to help target immigrants and American citizens in our sort of illegal law enforcement process? And that is something that we are trying to avoid moving forward. That is a direct result of the failure of privacy and digital sort of rights regulation over the last 20 years. That data should not be there to be
Right.
used for these authoritarian means. And that's something that like little by little in context, whether it's just chatbots or comprehensive privacy or whatever, we need to limit that scope of information collected, used, retained, all that stuff.
That gave me the opportunity to plug. I had a conversation with Miranda Bogan a few weeks ago on the harms associated with targeted advertising in the context of chatbots.
Mm.
Everyone should check it out if they haven't yet. It's really compelling and, not great in the direction things are heading. Well, so if this legislation were made law today, What would be the biggest shift, do you think, in how companies go about designing, deploying, and governing chatbots? Like, what would fundamentally be different?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would like give clear rules of the road so that companies of all sizes would be able to have understanding and consistency in what data can we collect, what limitations do we have to put on the outputs of our chatbot, and what sort of, information do we have to be looking out for, flagging and reporting out to state enforcers. I think that honestly it would provide some clarity and better competition from small and medium sized firms. Right? There is this question about whether regulation kills innovation or breeds it by creating clear rules of the road. So I think that would happen. And I think that, there would be just safer chatbot systems. There would be chatbot systems that collect a little bit less data. There'd be chatbot systems that don't use your data, that when you are using an input data and say that you are upset because your mom just died, it's not able to sort of, send you high priced flights or things that you might do when you are emotional and worried about those things, right? It limits the manipulative nature of those chatbots. And so I think honestly, if the legislation are made law, it would maybe limit some of the worst products, but it would not necessarily do all that much to change the products on the market besides making them safer and better, right? I think that some will argue if this law passed, you're unplugging all the really helpful products that are all over the place. But in practice, we're sort of improving them.
Most of the arguments from companies are, to use your term, bullshit, where it's like regulation bad, innovation good,
Yeah.
China bad.
Yep.
Are there arguments coming from companies that you find either reasonable or compelling or that shifted in some way how you thought about this model legislation?
Yeah. I think there's a few things that on one hand, we saw the reasonable arguments from a lot of different parties about just banning a tool or banning, just for people under 18, and how hard that would be, how much age verification and privacy sort of defeating mechanisms would be needed to actually implement that, or ways in which there are really significant onerous reporting requirements. And so what we did was, in response to those things, was create clear but flexible reporting requirements that a state AG could actually write in response to the harms that you're seeing in a given year or in a given period of time, and only filing it with the state AG and understanding that some key information doesn't have to be fully public, even though we think that that's not necessarily something that should be a big concern. But, frankly, a lot of the other ways in which there are complaints about it fail to specify specific ways in which it actually would make a problem. There is the general gesture towards innovation and against competition from other countries like China, and sort of how, one thing that we see a lot is this argument that AI can help in medicine, can help in business, can help in education, all these really important things. And in fact, while we don't necessarily agree that their claims of that are always, comparable to what we're seeing on the market, but we're allowing for that by creating clear, safe ways that you should not need input data to yield targeted advertising to build a cancer detection system, right? And so I think that the specificity of our bill, I think actually does lead to the legitimacy of fighting against those sort of broad arguments of no, we can't do that because it's fighting innovation. But it's okay, all we're saying is that you can't collect this data, and you can't make your you can't make your chatbot say, I'm a licensed lawyer, here's my things, you should say this to the judge when that's a terrible idea. All of those things create clear red lines and have nothing to do with the beneficial use cases of AI, frankly. And so, in response to some of both the legitimate and illegitimate arguments from industry, our response was specificity.
Since putting out the report, have you gotten any inbound from companies saying, either that they're in support of it because they think it will it'll help on the competition front, or that it gives them clear sort of rules of the road, or what's the sort of response from the private sector been like?
Yeah, frankly, like in building it, we've talked to people that were ex-private sector or, technologists, but in practice, we have not received responses from industry, at least the big industry themselves. We have received a lot of outreach from state legislators themselves, from federal legislators that are like intrigued by this approach, but frankly, no, we have not really gotten any outreach from the industry itself.
Well, I hope at some point the interest from state legislatures and enforcers will prompt the interests
Yeah.
on the company front to engage
I mean,
constructively.
yeah. I expect the companies and their representatives or trade associations to be there with us talking to legislators at the same time if this bill gets a hearing in those states. But I'm not necessarily holding my breath for companies coming to try to work with us and figure it out together.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. Well, stepping back for a minute, like
Yeah.
what vision of a sort of human to machine relationship would you say is embedded in this piece of legislation? Like, if we take its principles seriously, what kind of society are we trying to build towards, and what kind of futures are we sort of deliberately trying to foreclose?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the general vision is the human autonomy and power to sort of control your own life and to have limited sort of manipulation and, sort of other bad behavior from companies limited as a sort of guarantee, right? It's not just that you have to hope that, like, oh, I've heard that Anthropic is slightly less evil than OpenAI, and so maybe I'll
Right.
use this, right? Like, and we're creating a vision where we're not like waiting for a beneficial sort of CEO to see the light and make sure that like everything is safe and that you're not using your personal data for abusive ways. We are trying to create that place where people can feel safe and comfortable using these tools or not using these tools, right? We don't want people to continue to feel completely powerless about like, I might as well use whatever and give whatever information because they're probably getting it somewhere, which is what a lot of people sort of, it's disheartening, but it's fair to say. And so we are trying to sort of create a future where, the machine, so to speak, can be useful and sort of like, you know, at best sort of probably neutral, right? Like
Yeah.
not necessarily harmful, right? Like not a vector for additional private information to be shared, not a vector for profiling, right? Like we have seen like time and time again that, the people that, power things like Oracle and X and Meta are just interested in making money wherever and is not necessarily focused on providing a safer or more autonomous experience. So I think that we have to require that by law, and that's sort of what we're trying to build. What we're very deliberately trying to just foreclose is a circumstance where ChatGPT is your therapist, and so states and the federal government can feel confident in not expanding healthcare to people because the people that can't afford mental health care can just talk to ChatGPT, right? Like we are trying to foreclose this sort of like stratified world in which like technology is given as a tool for people that are sort of systematically disenfranchised or poor or whatever it is, and everyone else gets unaffected by machines, right? Like I think that is something that we are trying to really limit, right? Like these manipulative or irresponsible use cases are just not there. That's the sort of the concept behind the approach of Revel.
Yeah. I mean, it's not hard to imagine a future where sort of like really important services, medical, health, and so forth,
Yeah.
are not offered in the way that they have in the past because we've sort of all collectively agreed that chatbots can do that for us.
Yeah,
And I think it's right to push back on that for sure.
absolutely. Um,
You'll hear from time to time folks say that no one values privacy anymore.
mm,
And I always find it really frustrating because
Me too.
it doesn't acknowledge that like our sort of societal default settings have been eroding privacy for the last however long and like pushing us in this direction. So we shouldn't be
Mhm.
surprised. And I really appreciate that this bill is helping us imagine an alternative future where sort of privacy and autonomy is at the center.
Yeah, yeah, that is something that I experience even in the general, like, public sector, like, public interest focus of trying
Right.
to make our digital features and currents better. There is this, like, yeah, people don't some people say people don't care about their privacy anymore or they're just giving up or whatever it is. And I think that that is, like, as you're mentioning, like, not reflective of how people actually feel. It's reflective of the sort of like consistent and systematic failures to protect people and have this alternative vision. So I think one thing we're trying to do, whether it's from privacy or chatbots, is to say, you can basically have a similar economy, but a lot less manipulative and a lot less focused on collecting your personal data to use for any way in which we feel like later, or anyone who wants to buy it can feel like later. That doesn't have to be the way things are. And if like particularly bad businesses go out of business as a result of it, then I think that's something that we have to be able to be comfortable with. And so, I think that's a common refrain, but I always really try to push people away from that of like that as a result of a failure of governance and government, not a genuine feeling.
Right. Well, and if it happens to be the case that they can move through the world without privacy legislation regulations, that's more just a reflection of their privilege and the power that they have, because
Absolutely.
not a lot of people are afforded that same opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's Professor Chris Gilliard that called it luxury surveillance.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think that's a perfect way of putting it, right? You don't really worry about your Ring camera because you're not gonna be, targeted by law enforcement or whatever it is. Like, that's, like, one sort of subset of it, but also it's reflected in the fact that a lot of, privacy protective modes are, something you have to literally pay for.
Yep.
Or, less targeted ads, you have to literally pay for that, or install these extra things, or whatever it is. So, I think that's totally right.
Well, I could rant about that for a while, but
Yeah,
to
it's
wind
another
us
episode.
down, the last question I sort of always end on is, what advice would you offer your teenage self?
I think that like each step and choice and move you make is not as determinative as you think it is or other people say it is.
Yeah.
That like, it is always easier said on the other side. But I think in that moment, especially when you are a teenager in high school, college, whatever it is, it feels like you have to make every right step, every little thing. And especially for someone in the general digital space, as probably a lot of your listeners are, like it is something that is constantly moving. And I think people with all sorts of life experience are like really valuable to this movement of trying to make technology better and culture better and whatnot. And so like it is not just one path. So yeah, I think the basic the more basic version of that is to like chill out. But
Yeah.
I think it's the determinative nature of like each thing is not that high.
That's great. All right. Well, the model legislation is really stand out. It helps us all sort of imagine alternative futures in a way that feels genuinely hopeful. Everyone should give it a read. Ben Winters, thanks so much for coming on Untangled.
Thanks so much. Give it a read and also send it to your local state lawmaker.
Yeah, actually, that's a great follow up. Is there anything else that people could or should do if they were compelled by this conversation?
Yeah, I think, we already have this legislation introduced in Vermont and Arizona, and we're looking forward to many more introductions in states across the country, as well as some interest from federal legislators. So I think that if you are moved by this conversation, we purposely wrote this report in legislative language to be workable. And so, like, you could send it to your state lawmakers, you could send it to your federal lawmakers, you can reach out to me, and we can help you talk to your state lawmakers. And so, like, the more people make it clear to their elected representatives that they want a future like this, the better, chance we have at getting
All right, everyone go do what Ben said.
it.
Ben Winters, thanks so much.